1936, amid the Great Depression, grifter Johnny Hooker, played by Robert Redford, and his partners Luther Coleman, played by Robert Earl Jones, and Joe Erie, played by Jack Kehoe, con $11,000 in cash from an unsuspecting victim in Joliet, Illinois. Hooker loses his share of the con on a rigged roulette game, while Luther, buoyed by the windfall, decides to retire. He tells Hooker to seek out his old friend Henry Gondorff, played by Paul Newman, in Chicago to learn the big con. Corrupt Joliet Police Lieutenant William Snyder, played by Charles Durning, confronts Hooker, revealing that their mark was a courier for vicious Irish-American crime boss Doyle Lonigan, played by Robert Shaw. Lonigan's men murder Luther and the courier. After finding Luther dead, Hooker flees to Chicago. Hooker finds Gondorff drunk and in hiding from the FBI, running a carousel that is a front for a brothel, and asks for help taking down Lonigan. Initially reluctant, Gondorff relents and recruits a team of experienced con men. They decide to resurrect an elaborate, obsolete scam known as The Wire, using a large crew to create a phony off-track betting parlor. Snyder and Lonigan's men track Hooker to Chicago. Gondorff warns Hooker that if either of them find him, the con will have to fold. Aboard the opulent 20th Century Limited, Gondorff, posing as the boorish Chicago bookie Shaw, buys into Lonigan's private high-stakes poker game, being facilitated by the train's conductor. Shaw infuriates Lonigan with his obnoxious behavior, then cheats him out of $15,000. Hooker, posing as Shaw's disgruntled employee Kelly, is sent to collect the winnings and to convince Lonigan to help him take over Shaw's operation. Hooker returns home to find Lonigan's men waiting to assassinate him, but avoids their efforts. Gondorff is spooked by their attempt, but Hooker convinces him to keep the con alive. Snyder's pursuit of Hooker attracts the attention of undercover FBI agents led by Agent Polk, played by Dana Elcar, who orders Snyder to bring Hooker in to entrap Gondorff. Meanwhile, Lonigan, frustrated with his men's inability to kill Hooker for the Joliet con, orders the job to be given to Salino, his best assassin. A mysterious figure with black leather gloves begins following and observing Hooker. Kelly gives Lonigan a tip on a 7-to-1 long shot in a horse race that pays off. When Lonigan presses him for details, he reveals that he has a partner, Les Harmon, in the Chicago Western Union office, who will help them topple Shaw by winning bets he books on horse races through past posting. Lonigan is convinced after being provided the trifecta of another race, and agrees to finance a $500,000 bet to break Shaw and get revenge. Shortly thereafter, Snyder captures Hooker and brings him before Polk, who forces Hooker to betray Gondorff by threatening to jail Luther Coleman's widow. Feeling despondent the night before the sting, Hooker sleeps with a diner waitress named Loretta, played by Demetra Arliss. The next morning, as she walks toward him in an alley, the black-gloved man appears and shoots her dead before she could shoot Hooker. The man reveals to Hooker that he was hired by Gondorff to protect him and that the waitress was in fact Salino. At Harmon's direction, Lonigan bets $500,000 at Shaw's parlor on a horse named Lucky Dan. As the race begins, Harmon arrives and expresses shock at Lonigan's bet. When he said, "Place it," he meant that the horse would place, in other words, finish second. In a panic, Lonigan rushes to the teller window and demands his money back, at which point Polk, Snyder, and a half-dozen FBI agents storm the parlor. Polk tells Hooker he is free to go. Shocked at the betrayal, Gondorff shoots Hooker. Polk shoots Gondorff and orders Snyder to get the ostensibly respectable Lonergan away from the crime scene. With Lonergan and Snyder safely away, Hooker and Gondorff rise amid cheers and laughter. Polk is actually Hickey, a fellow con man who has been running a con atop the con with his FBI agents to divert Snyder and ensure that Lonergan abandons the money without ever realizing he was taken. As the con men strip the room of its contents, Hooker refuses his share of the money, claiming he would lose it anyway, and walks away with Gondorff. About the film. The Sting was directed by George Roy Hill and produced by Tony Bill, Michael Phillips, and Julia Phillips. Screenplay was written by David S. Ward. It was inspired by real-life cons detailed in David Moorer's book, The Big Con. The casting of the film includes Paul Newman, Robert Redford, and Robert Shaw. The Sting was filmed on location in Chicago and Los Angeles, with meticulous attention to detail in recreating the 1930s setting. The music, featuring Scott Joplin's Ragtime compositions adapted by Marvin Hamlisch, became iconic and won an Academy Award. The film was released on December 25, 1973, made on a budget of $5.5 million and grossed over $159 million at the box office. It was critically acclaimed for its screenplay, direction, and performances, winning 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Its legacy endures as one of cinema's great caper films. Though a poorly received sequel, The Sting 2, was released in 1983. Interesting facts about The Sting, 1973 movie. 1. Paul Newman and Robert Redford's on-screen chemistry, first showcased in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, was a key draw for audiences. 2. George Roy Hill used some 1930s stylistic techniques. The film starts with a 1930s-era Universal logo and used editing wipes to transition between scenes and iris shots. 3. Paul Newman and Robert Redford were each paid $500,000 for their role, the highest rate for an actor working at that time. Adjusted for inflation, that is equal to about $3 million in year 2022 currency. 4. Robert Redford didn't see the movie until June 2004. 5. The famous Ragtime music, particularly The Entertainer by Scott Joplin, wasn't from the 1930s but was adapted by Marvin Hamlisch, creating a unique period feel. 6. The script by David S. Ward was originally rejected by several studios before being picked up. 7. Robert Shaw, who played the villain Doyle Lonergan, performed with a limp caused by a genuine knee injury. 8. Jack Nicholson turned down the role of Johnny Hooker before Robert Redford changed his mind and decided to play it. 9. The film won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay. 10. The movie was filmed on the backlot of Universal Studios, and the diner in which Hooker meets Lonergan is the same diner interior used in Back to the Future, 1985, in which Marty McFly first meets his father and calls Doc Brown.